Welcome to today's edition of the Human School Mind Shift Cards podcast, a part of our learning journey here at the Human School.
I'm Rachel.
I'm Chad.
And I'm Randy.
Each week, we will model brief inquiry conversations around one of our Mind Shift cards from the Human School Mind Shift Cards pack. If you want to explore further questions, there are card sets available for you at thehuman.school. In this episode, our question comes from the inventor Compass Point. And our question is, in what ways do schools perpetuate the past? So I'll go ahead and get us started. I always think about Will Richardson's phrase, the nostalgia for school, or the nostalgia of school, when I think about the way that schools oftentimes perpetuate the past. And one of the ways I connect with this is that because most of us have this collective experience of what school was, everyone seems to think they know what school currently is in the current context. Excuse me. So I think, first of all, that's the first thing I connect with when I think about, perpetuating the past. And what it feels like to a lot of people, is heavily content driven, discipline, heavily structured, the cells and bells mindset, the idea that, learning only happens in one place. It's in school and it's the only thing that we honor. And so I think there are lots of ways in which our schools perpetuate the past. The model was driven, everything from how our school year is structured based on the agrarian cycle to, the structure of the day. So I think schools just structurally are very much symbols of a past that just really doesn't seem to exist or function in the modern world or modern America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot about the fact that schools are not for the future, even though we're trying to, quote unquote, educate future generations and trying to prepare them for post-school life. Everything that we do, now I'm coming from a secondary perspective, but the vast majority of our time and our day is spent in the past. Whether it's in English class reading historical novels, or in history class literally learning about history, or in science class learning about past discoveries, math class learning about past practices and processes. Other than maybe some of the electives, even music classes often are reading or playing like hundreds of year-old compositions. It's all in the past, and there's very little that we're allowing space for students to create in the present, let alone in that future set.
And is that a new competency that we should be teaching kids? Foresight, thinking about the future, but they're being bathed in a system that is keeping them in the past and in the present as well, but not very much in the future. So the word that comes to mind for me regarding this question is just standardization. Like, we can go back to the history. I think of the history of how we got here. And, it was Horace Mann that actually visited some Germanic empire and observed the new system of schooling there, which was called the Common School. And he brought it back here, the Common School, just the name of it. We wanted everyone to be the same. And then that sort of mirrored the industrial age and the factory and the efficiency and getting everybody to do the same thing, and bells that chimed when you moved to a different thing or when you took a break, or that we keep doing all those things. So just the whole concept of standardization, and it's just so rooted in the past, like where Rachel was saying, and it's so not about the future. The future isn't about standardization. The future is about, what is the unique pieces that each of us as human beings bring to the work, whether it's the work of learning or the work of building something or the work of whatever our path in life happens to be. So it's really about the individuality in the larger context of a community, and not at all about standardization. And our schools have just not kept up with that. They have definitely perpetuated it.
I wanted to go back, to Rachel's comment about, the curriculum and how the curriculum really seems to live in the past. And as a former social studies teacher, that
I'm the retired one.
Yeah, you are the retired one. As a former social studies teacher, that kicked me in the gut a little bit. I will say though that I think what's kind of interesting about the current context is the reluctance to let the past be a guide for the future. And I think that that's probably a really important distinction when it comes to some of these, which is how are you leveraging whatever the content, the piece of literature, the historical, information, if we're simply doing it to memorize or know about the past, but we're not leveraging it to compare or inform our current context or our future context, then that's the real miss, right? And I think the other thing that really resonated with me in your two comments were, school as a construct about keeping people uniform or keeping people kind of in line is absolutely a prior or perpetuating the past of what our own society looks like. And people keep using the word like post-pandemic, where if you're listening to this now in early 2022, I mean, we're still very much living in the middle of a pandemic focused world. And so we know that the world has changed outside of public education, but public education is still trying to hold on to a world or bring it back into focus. And I just don't know that it's possible. And so I think this conversation around perpetuating the past is a really interesting one, which is, where do we hold on to what we want it to be? I've said all along that what's happening right now is people are torn between wanting to go back to a world that was and not wanting to go back at all. And that tension of those two ideas right now is really what's happening. And I think what's tiring a lot of people out, at least in public education. I think a lot of people recognize that we're never going back. At the same time, there's a strong desire to go back to when it was maybe less complex and messy, which is, I think, something maybe that people who are here sharing with us might have in common, which is that they embrace the messiness and that they understand that uniformity and standardization that was present in the past is probably not ideal. It probably was never ideal, at least for learners. It might have been ideal for the country. It might have been ideal for the custodial nature of school, of families having their kids someplace during the day so they can work. But I'm not so sure that we're moving into a future in which that's going to be good for anybody, not just the economy, but also good for kids.
I was thinking about your use of the word guide when it came to looking at history. And from that, I had almost sort of like an adverse reaction to it. Not that I think that it's not important for us to learn from the past, because, we keep perpetuating some of the same mistakes. But also I think that it continues to frame our choices. Like I keep thinking about the word imagination in this conversation, and how so much of that perpetuating of the past, this is how it was, this is how it is, this is how it will be, removes any space for imagination of what it could be or what it might be. And that having history or having any sort of past practices and experiences, I don't know that I would want them to guide me. I think influence or I can't think of the word that I want to use, like that there is a support structure there. I think that ignoring the past is dangerous. But I also think that there has to be some shifting, kind of going to what you said before or after about, post-pandemic and the world has changed, whether we like it or not. That there has to be something else along with it that allows for more space for imagination, and a version of this beyond school that could be very different than what it was, not just perpetuating the past or being guided by the past, but reinventing entirely, and that we have to make space for that somehow too.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement. I think my sense of my use of the word guide is that I think that a lot of people want to build a future devoid of any context of the past, which I think is equally problematic to being stuck in the past. Like, I think those two things, like if you're only designing from your prior experiences, you're misguided. I think if you're ignoring our collective past, you're also probably not going to arrive where you need to be. So just to clarify, my use of the word guide is inform, be cognizant of, learn from those lessons, as opposed to saying like, this is what it should be because of the past. In my mind, there are currently people who want to pretend that the past didn't happen. And I would say that that's dangerous without getting too far in the weeds.
So one of my curiosities from this conversation is, okay, if we agree that schools perpetuate the past, if we can say that's a fact, then what are the beliefs and values that allow us to behave in a way that continues that perpetuating? And so I think that sort of grounds us in one of our questions here is, what are the mindsets, what are the beliefs that people have around those things that we say are being perpetuated? And is there an alignment between those beliefs and the perpetuation or the doing? And or is there a disconnect? And I think we believe that there is a disconnect, that in our hearts, we really want to object to a lot of those things that we're perpetuating. And so I guess my curiosity and my question is rooted in our work here, and that is, how do we create conditions for people to begin to examine those hidden beliefs, those hidden values? Again, it's like we're the fish in the water and we don't quite know it's there. And I think these conversations and the cards are an example and a way that we're helping ourselves and hopefully other people within our community to start to have those conversations where we unearth those things that are out of alignment. And then we can figure out, how do we stop perpetuating the things that we don't want to continue to perpetuate?
And I'll give you a perfect example of that in kind of the opposition, which is that, you take something like a school building's bell schedule, which is kind of a pretty big deal to change for a variety of reasons because of its interconnectedness and impact on lots of different things, staffing and instructional time, and et cetera. Sometimes that work is done outside the context of, to Rachel's point, imagination or wonderment or values or vision. It's, budget is causing it. And then we wonder why people aren't inspired by the change and they reject it. And so what we're hoping to accomplish here at the Human School is what I suspect is more of a place where people can vision or drive their values through the work. And one of those is, I think, this conversation around perpetuating the past. I tend to go towards, the structures. What are the things? So as Rachel pointed out, curriculum. There's this huge curriculum. We've all assumed that curriculum has to be in place. But I think a really interesting question is, is curriculum necessary? Or who writes the curriculum? Are there places where they're authentically involving students or community members in developing a strong curriculum? I almost said the word rigorous and then I paused because that's the old school, traditional school speak that we all are a part of. Just being transparent, I was going to not go past it, but I want to, again, we're talking about learning in public and it being messy. I mean, it's really easy to say a strong and rigorous curriculum when that's really not what I want to drive for as I kind of think forward. So I think it's a wonderful question. Rachel, I'm wondering if you have any questions or curiosities off of this conversation.
Yeah, I'm wondering how we hold those things in tension. We talk about those sort of disparate ideas often. How do we hold the past and our history and what we've had in tension with a future that is a giant question mark, while also maybe accepting, and maybe there's some grief and mourning, the lack of control we have. Like, I think a lot of those structures come because we're trying to control something that we don't know is coming. The future is really scary. Because there are so many variables. So how do we hold the tension of being able to learn from and being informed by the past, while also helping students be functional in the present, but also leaving space for the imagination of what the future could be, and what we would like it to be, in the places that we do have control. I think that's a hard conversation, and I don't have answers. It's not a roadmap.
Yeah, no, I think to your point, our goal is not to have answers. Our goal is to always, I always think that good questions, this kind of the theme of this particular podcast is good questions lead to better questions, right? That's the goal. I think for me, the question that I'll kind of close us with here, is really at the heart of objecting, which is helping people to find their voice in asking the why and the what if without the yeah, but. Because I think that I have this assumption, maybe incorrect, that many people feel the things that we feel, but they maybe don't feel that they can vocalize it broadly. It's the thing you say quietly in the corner of your classroom or with a colleague, and so part of what I'm hoping to learn through this experience is, are there more people out there that have these questions and they want to understand, again, going back to the history, why do we teach curriculum the way that we do? Why are they in silos? Why aren't they interdisciplinary? Why do I have to have 24 credits? Where'd the Carnegie unit come from? What does that still serve us? Like, there's all these amazing questions that are because we are holding on to a past. And so I'm hoping that through this process, we're helping people to drive towards more questions. So with that, I'd like to close this today, and thank you so much for being with us. As we wrap up, all these good inquiries, we hope lead to more curiosity, and that as your mind begins to shift, you'll share your thoughts and ideas and your big questions with us at the Human School community. So we wanted to thank you so much for learning alongside us here at the Human School's Mindshift Cards podcast. The Human School. By placing humanity at the center of all design, the Human School seeks to share an evolving story of learning and its impact on the world. Visit thehuman.school and its learning and public hub for additional resources and to join our community committed to placing humanity at the center of all design. You can also follow us on all kinds of social media, and mostly we cannot wait to hear how you are intentionally placing humanity at the center. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Chat soon.